Uh, I mean, that's a very generally you could say that.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, we've seen a rise in people who are gay or bi coming out, and frankly, I don't think you can. I don't think being gay is a
Oh,
choice. Like, I could not make myself gay. Okay, I could not. I can't imagine looking at a dude and think that's attractive. So that's why I believe there's no way it could be a choice, because I can't even imagine just like being straight and then deciding to find other men attractive. It's just the whole choice thing doesn't really make sense to me because of that. Anyway, though, I think it's for the same reason we've seen more gay and bi people come out. I think society broadly has gotten far more accepting of gay and trans people, etc. And so we've seen a lot more people come out as gay. We heard I know I'm drawing the same comparison, but there are many comparisons to be drawn, I
Muligvis.
think. Obviously, the same
Det kan også være, det
argument
ikke
was
fungerer. Jeg er
made
stadig
back in
der.
the day that, if your kid hung out with kids who were gay, then they were more likely to be gay. And that was a talking point that would come out more. I think it's a very simple explanation. I think it just has more to do with society getting more accepting. And obviously, if you are closeted trans or you are closeted gay, the friends you're going to be making at school or the friends you're going to be making in any social space that's given is probably going to be other people with that identity. So there's probably maybe a little bit of selection bias there, but yeah, that seems to be what the data I've seen suggests as the reason. But you go ahead.
well, I think it would be very hard to tell that. I'm not aware of any sort of methodology by which you could really discern whether or not that explained, like what percentage of the trends say that explained or something like that. Like I said, we don't have very strong data. I would be surprised, though, if it wasn't the case that having that option socially available, in the sense that it's something that you think of, it's a frame by which you are open to interpreting your psychological phenomena through, that sort of thing. I will say this is just an intuitive thing, but just intuitively, it would be very surprising to me if it is the case that actually there are no people who had a set of desires that in the past they would have interpreted one way, but now, due to an open availability in their mind of other options, are inclined to interpret that in terms of gender dysphoria, just based on how the human mind sort of works generally. That would seem surprising to me. Yeah, I guess I'll just stop there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the rapid onset gender dysphoria thing, or whatever anyone wants to call it, the ROGD thing specifically, comes from that study I talked about, or that poll, actually, that online survey that I talked about. But that's generally the term that's used for it.
Well,
I can't, like, I imagine maybe some kids or some young people or some people down the road, like, maybe have been sort of convinced into thinking that they had gender dysphoria because they hung out with people who were. Don't get me wrong. Okay, listen, I'm going to be honest here. I'm going to be complete. This is me ceding a point completely over to you, okay? I admit there are a lot of people in the trans community that can be a little bit weird about like other people and whether or not they're trans. There are a lot of people in my community, got a lot of trans people in my community, like to call me an egg all the time and say that I'm like trans and in the closet or whatever. And it's a little disconcerting. And I understand that probably isn't something that just happens in my community. I'm sure that happens a lot. There are a lot of trans people that joke or even suggest that certain people are trans and don't know it yet. And I think that's a little bit weird because it can lead to sort of muddying people's perception of their sexuality and whatnot. And it kind of maybe isn't good for people to have that sort of wrench thrown into the gears. But while I think maybe there's been some cases where people have been misled about their identity in the past, I think generally speaking, I just don't think there's any reason to disingenuously claim to be trans. That's my main concern I have with this argument from a lot of people on your side of things, because there's an implication that, okay, so if it's not being done sincerely and genuinely through a completely sincere and genuine desire to change your gender and to live differently, and that this isn't like a valid identity, then the flip to that is that we shouldn't accept them and that they're causing some type of harm. And I don't agree with that. Or that they're causing harm to themselves. And I don't agree with that. They don't seem to think that either.
Well, I definitely. Well, so there probably is some subset of people who are literally just lying about their gender identity, but that's probably a very small number.
There's got to be some amount.
But that's not primarily what I'm talking about. I would be thinking of people who have a set of, like, for instance, say you're a male, right, and you're attracted to a set of, in some sense, feminine behaviors or something like that. And there's a million ways there's a million ways you could interpret those sorts of feelings and desires. Probably not a million, but there's more than one, let's say. And that a social context that primes you to interpret them in terms of gender dysphoria, it would seem super unsurprising to me if that increased the number of people who are interpreting them in that way. Whereas if it was in 1920, I bet a lot of people who had those same feelings. It's not that they would be thinking, oh man, I want to be, they wouldn't be thinking about it in the exact same way, like in terms of how trans people today think about like I'm the real identity as a woman or whatever. It would be a much, well, different, surely it would be a very different phrase. I don't even see how it would be possible to think that they think about the way that trans people do today.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like so what I'm curious about is, do you believe that gender dysphoria, as it's been described by like the medical, like the scientific community and like the medical field, do you believe that gender dysphoria is real?
I assume so. I mean, I'm not familiar off the top of my head with their description, but it's just the idea that you have a desire to be treated in a way that matches how people of a certain gender are normally treated, that is not the way that you would be treated if you were treated as someone who has the average gender of the person of your sex. I mean, something like that, roughly. I mean, that's certainly a thing, assuming that's what they mean by it.
Okay, so at the end of the day, our goal is to find essentially a treatment or a cure for gender dysphoria, because we've seen gender dysphoria, we've witnessed it in the world, we've observed it, we've seen that it is a thing that people experience. So the argument is, at the end of the day, everything we're talking about here really doesn't matter at the end of the day. What really matters, the real question that we're trying to answer, is whether or not we allow trans people to pursue their transition, or we build roadblocks to prevent it. Because if they're hurting themselves, then naturally we want to make it harder for them to do so. And if they're helping themselves, then naturally we should want to make it easier for them to do so. And I just have not been convinced that there's enough evidence that trans people are hurting themselves by transitioning, as opposed to helping themselves, and that the studies and the data are all, you know, for the most part, seem to have their shit together and seem to suggest that this is what's best for them. And I want what's best for them. I want what's best for everybody. Just like you mentioned before, how we need to have a set of categories for things that we
I
consider to
wanna
be
be
societally
the
acceptable and not
very
based on
best.
maximizing
No
human
one in
happiness.
the
I mean,
world.
it seems like if we're trying to maximize human happiness, at least from my perspective, it seems like letting trans people do what they, you know, want in regards to their identity is the best way to do that.
Right, and obviously I've already explained why I don't think it's good for them. We talked about the suicide attempt, and then the Yale, and the trusting experts, and we could do that whole thing again, but let's not do that whole thing again. Okay, so the other thing I guess would be to talk about. I think the final thing would be, at least the final thing I have. If you have something else, then obviously that's fine. But that cisgender people, right? When we talk about, and this is most profound in the case of mate selection, right? That seemingly a lot of trans people would want the following to not be true. Not all trans people, of course, but a significant number. That they would say that there's something problematic about the fact that if there was a person who, so far as I could tell, was a female, down to the, you know, I analyzed the genitals in detail. So far as I can tell, there's no way physically for me to tell that this person was born male, sex-wise. That the knowledge that person had been born a male would make me extremely, you know, have no sexual interest in them whatsoever, even though visually, even if, and this is not, you know, normally the case of trans people, but even if it was the case, they were visually completely indistinct from an actual female. And that's great. And seemingly to me anyway, right, you have to change that if you want to take people seriously when they say, I want to be treated like a woman. That's a big part of what it is to be treated like a woman. And that to change that would require cis people doing something which would be very psychologically, well, I don't even know if it'd be possible, but if it was possible, very psychologically uncomfortable for them. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, so I assume this falls in like the wanting some amount.
Nej, jeg har ikke fået set Arcane endnu. Jeg har været rigtig sløset med det. Men jeg skal se den.
Sexual
Det lyder som om den er skidegod.
In the
Jeg kan
sexual
godt,
marketplace
jeg har
as
set
well,
nogle
by, like,
clips.
cis or straight people or whatever. I assume that falls into trans people desire.
Ja, jeg fik aldrig nogensinde. Jeg kom ikke den dag. Jeg fik aldrig nogensinde set de resterende afsnit. Jeg skulle have set 6 afsnit eller sådan noget. Og jeg troede til at starte med bare, at de ville være sådan anime-længde, sådan 20 minutter, men de er jo 45 minutter stykket. Og det har jeg ikke tid til. Eller, der er andre ting, jeg hellere vil, end at se 6 afsnit gange 45 minutter inden den søndag.
Yeah,
definitely.
okay.
Oh!
Yeah, so the trans movement outside of, and I've run into some of these people and they exist, but they're few
Der
and
kommer
far
aldrig den
between,
dag.
believe me.
Godt nok.
Besides a few people in the trans like activism community that do unironically argue that you're like a horrible transphobic piece of shit if you have what I would refer to as genital preferences, then yeah, you would like, there are people who would say that kind of thing, but they are few and far between, broadly speaking, and I imagine you already know that. But there are people that act like that. But broadly speaking, the trans community isn't trying to push cis people to have sex with them. I believe that like
Har du fået set den
statistically,
hele?
most trans women tend to end up with other trans women rather than cis women or cis men anyway. So it's not like there's really this massive group of trans people
Er den så
that
nice, som folk siger?
have had sex with. And even like if we draw the line to cis people, not every cis woman on the street expects you to have sex with them, right? Like that's not the expectation they have when they go outside and they're a woman. They don't expect you to be like, all right, I want to have sex with. They don't expect every guy they encounter to want to have sex with them. They hope that doesn't happen even most of the time. I don't know. I don't think a huge part of the trans movement is saying that if you wouldn't fuck me like you would any other woman, like in the case of a trans woman, then you're a transphobe. I don't think that's all that common of a talking point. As for like broadly, trans people desiring others to interact with them in a certain way, every single marginalized group expects that from people once they achieve some amount of social acceptance and respect, right? Like we had a general kind of social consensus more recently in the last few decades that if you're not racist and you accept that like black people are human and all that, then you probably shouldn't say the N-word, at least not around them. They don't like it when you say it around them for sure. That like with gay people, as they've gotten more accepted, we've sort of determined as a society that you shouldn't call them the F slur anymore. Like that's a thing that we shouldn't really do anymore. We should maybe let them get married. Like, yeah, we do kind of accept once these groups have sort of reached a certain level of broader societal acceptance that, yeah, we do extend certain things to them that could be considered different behavior because of their identity, right? Like we stop calling black people the N-word. We've changed the way we act. We've stopped calling gay people the F-slur. And hopefully we do the same thing with trans people. We stop like, you know, denying their identity or referring to them by the T-slur or insert whatever, you know, discriminatory behavior you could imagine.
So, firstly, what I was talking about before was not a genital preference, right? Because I didn't specify that maybe.
Well, when I say general preference, that like, so there's bottom surgery for trans women, so they can have like it's called a neo-vagina, is what it's called after the surgery. Obviously a neo-vagina that was made through surgery isn't going to be exactly the same as a cis vagina. So I mean, sure. Like, for example, if I saw a trans woman and she'd gotten bottom surgery and she had a neo-vagina, I would not get canceled for saying to this, if this, let's say this hypothetical trans woman walked up to me and propositioned me for a date or some, you know, fling or whatever, and I turned them down because I was like, yeah, I'm just not really into like, I got general preferences and all that, I would maybe get canceled by like 1% of the online left, maybe less, right? Like this is, broadly speaking, not a huge issue. Like there's not that many people calling for you or anybody else to have sex with trans women, even after they've had their surgery. And especially trans men aren't expecting cis women to fuck them, or trans men that aren't expecting cis men to fuck them, or vice versa, cis women to fuck them. Like this just isn't a thing that's like a huge issue.
So it's not a huge issue right now, but I think that's.
Buy $30, yes.
A few reasons. One of which is that, as I think you even said, the surgeries that are available now typically do not make people physically indistinct from cisgendered versions of the same gender. The point that I was trying to make was that even if they did, a lot of cis people would have a problem that had nothing to do with how they looked, right? It was just having to do with the fact that they knew that they were transgender. And the way that I've heard trans people talk about this normally is that if that is the whole reason for the bias, A, it just objectively is an anti-trans bias, sexually speaking, and that B, they find that problematic. And to the degree that they're not demanding that now, I think you have to make a distinction between what people demand and what they want, because if you take it seriously that they want to be treated as a woman, right, then what that to be treated as a woman among many other things would mean that males would consider you a straight males, a potential sexual partner. Now, of course, maybe they don't consider you a sexual partner because they don't find you attractive for some reason other than being trans. But to be excluded from the get-go because you're trans is to not be treated like a woman. I mean, that seems to me just to be the case. And I think that is, I mean, I guess there's no, to my knowledge, there's no like survey of this, but I think that is something that trans people generally see as well.
Yeah, so the trans movement actually is more so trying to like to give a more. I'll give like
What?
an example of how a very similar interaction could happen with like a cis woman and you. I assume you're straight and you're into women. Maybe,
True.
maybe not. Yeah, okay, yeah. So here's like a comparison that might happen here, right? So let's say you're out at the bar with the boys, okay? You're out at the bar with the boys. You see hot lady sitting in a stool, like 2 seats down, and you lean over to your man, your guy, your brother, your boy, your best friend, and you're like, hey man, you see that girl down there? Fuck, she's hot, dude. Like, God, look at that ass, you know? I'm also assuming you're single here. If you're married or anything like that, then hopefully Sean's wife or partner or whatever do not take any offense to this. Anyway, you see this woman at the bar. You're like, damn, she's hot. Do you know anything? Do you know her? And your friend's like, yeah, I know her, but like, listen, between you and me, bro, she got like this weird giant birthmark right on her leg. It's like the size of a dinner plate. It is not appealing. All right, it's like you just don't go for it. Do you think that like making that decision based on aesthetic problems to not have sex with a woman means you're no longer treating this woman like a woman? Like if I send you a picture, look up on your browser if you can right now, Nikita Dragon, very well-known trans woman model, very attractive woman. Like you're gonna look at her and you're gonna be like, that's a trans woman? That's probably going to be your response if you see a picture of her. If you saw her walking down the street, you'd be like, damn, she's hot. And you'd definitely treat her like a woman. You'd have no way of knowing she's trans unless you're already familiar with her, believe me. You would treat her just as any woman you saw on the street. Do you think whether or not the vagina that, or whatever genitals this person has, being whether it be a penis and balls or a vagina made through a surgery, do you really think that like it would be good to change the way you treat this person in question because now you've seen their genitals and that's what told you that actually they were assigned a different gender at birth, so now you think it's appropriate to like flip your entire way you've treated them, the pronouns you use for them, the name you use for them, all of that? Does that really make sense?
Well, I mean, two things. One, I mean, with the example of the girl with the wart or whatever, surely that would not
The
be,
big birthmark, yeah.
Yeah, surely not having sex with her because, or not trying to proposition her because that would not be to treat her like she wasn't a woman. But if the reason that I wasn't going to try to have sex with her was because I didn't consider her a woman, then surely that would be. I mean, these things.
Well, no, the trans community is trying to get it to be on that level, right? Like the scenario that you're describing, the goal of the trans community is to make it so it's as casual as that. Like your decision, just be like, I'm not really into like trans women. It's just not my thing. You know, they want that. Like the trans community wants that decision on your part to be as inconsequential and like just on the same tiers, thinking I'm not really going to hook up with that girl because insert feature that she has isn't appealing to me, even if every other feature she has or the rest of her is, you know, something you would find completely attractive and appealing. Maybe that one feature isn't something that's cool for you, so that's a deal breaker. That's the point that the trans community wants to bring it to. They don't want our society to be at a point where it's huge discourse that everyone's talking about or someone's getting canceled for when someone announces that like they wouldn't have a sexual relationship with a trans person. Most trans people want this out of the discourse. A lot of trans people, when they saw I was having this debate, didn't want the debate to happen because they hate when debates happen between cis people over the validity of trans people's bodies. They hate it. They just want to be left alone to live their own life. They hate this whole discourse and culture war and moral panic and everything around it. It feels like the id pole, the onus of defending their own identity has been shoved upon them by the right, rather than the perception of them stepping up and engaging in this activism in a way that's meant to sort of annoy the general populace that doesn't really care about politics. No, the trans community engages in the rhetoric and the behavior that it does because identity politics, oppression, and sort of being forced to fight for social acceptance has been thrusted on them, not because they're trying to force you into anything. This is more of a retaliatory movement than one that's just coming out of the woodwork to fuck things up, as some might say.
That's still recharging.
Okay, well, I think this is going to just come down to us saying that we have seen trans people say different things. And we probably can't get past that.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many barriers in our disagreement that we can really like talk through in a debate. But I mean, if there's a point where you feel like it's just not going to be productive, then feel free to like move it on. Or hell, I mean, we can wrap up pretty soon if we're running out of time, because I don't know if there's much more to go through. But
What the
it's up
fuck?
to you. You can lead it from here, because I don't really have much else to talk about.
Spoilede det hele bare.
Yeah, did you I mean, we were supposed to do like a Q&A, weren't we?
Yeah, I guess
bet.
there's the Q&A, yeah.
We can jump right into it. And want to remind you folks, our guests are linked in the description. We really do appreciate these guys, and also want to remind you, want to
What the
encourage
spoiler
you to
alt bare.
attack the
Stop it.
argument
Oh, stop
instead
it.
of the person. And we are very excited to let you know our guests are not only linked here in the description on YouTube, but if you're listening via podcast, we link our guests, both Sean and Xander Hall, in the podcast episode as well, so you can find their links there too. This first question coming in from NXC5 says, Xander Hall, do you consider biological facts when you talk or think about these things like XX and XY chromosome pairs, or neuroscience, or, oh, I don't know how to mispronounce this, physiognomy, help me out here,
Oh,
physiognomy?
Very fancy science word, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I can see.
Bro, han døde næsten. Holy shit. Han havde 1% HP.
When it comes to the argument of like psychology, yeah, that's a big part of it. That psychology is the bread and butter of the whole like trans argument. Really, that's where all of it's coming from.
You got it. This one from Mango T.
Holy shit, you're one
Thanks for
HP.
your kind words and appreciate your support of these debates. So I want to mention, as I already said, our guests are linked in the description, and we really do appreciate these guys. Nikki says, thank you, Xander Hall. You're hitting the nails right on the head. You got a fan out there, Xander Hall.
Thank you.
This one coming in from Mango T says, Xan, do you believe that your identity is a test from the almighty creator? And do you think you should overcome those feelings?
Do I think that my identity is a test from a creator? No, I don't think so. I'd say I'm pretty happy with my identity. I'm pretty happy where I'm at right now. I need to go to the gym more. Got two things I'm working on right now: waking up earlier and getting to bed earlier, and going to the gym more. That's the current thing I'm trying to overcome in my life.
You got it. And Mango T
shit.
also asks, Xan, do you believe your identity is a result
Åh, det er
of
godt. Det har reddet lige hans liv.
from societal programming?
Det er sådan, alt spawnet bare rundt om os. Han havde 1% liv.
So much. How much of our personalities and how much
Han
of
var lige
who
med
we
en
are
clutch
is a
heal.
product of
Han
nurture,
var lige
how
været
much
død.
of it is a product of nature.
Jeg aner ikke, om han
Such
var
an interesting
hardcore,
thing to
dog.
think about for a while. Like if you
Det
get
virkede seriøst ikke, som om han
take a
ville
few
dø.
puffs from the old Kush and just really
Fuck,
give it
man.
a
Jeg
thought,
troede, jeg
it'll
skulle dø
send
der.
you on quite the trip. I'm inclined to believe that nurture
Der
has
er,
a
ja.
bigger effect on your
Men man behøver heller ikke at have
personality,
den endnu.
how
Jeg
you
tror, man
behave,
kan,
than like nature, how you're born.
man kan tage den, når man har
I think
lyst,
it's more so
egentlig.
your environment, personally.
Man skal bare have
This
adderen.
question coming in from the Crawdaddy
Det er det eneste,
09. Now, some of these are comments
der
as
require.
well. They said, as a society,
Jamen,
we
alle
discourage
levels.
deception.
Helst. Ellers
Affirmation
skal man have
of the
recordet det.
transsexual is a deception. The trans quote-unquote ally is dodging
Jesus
it
Christ.
by name-calling it gender when sex
Fuck, det er
is the key
scary.
word.
Alt begyndte bare at spawn rundt om os.
Yeah, so sex and gender aren't the same thing. This is overwhelmingly agreed upon. We didn't even get into this during the debate, but yeah, there's no foundation for an argument on that whatsoever. Sex and gender just aren't the same thing.
This one coming in from Ozzy and says, keep your government out of my pants. My choice.
True.
Next up from Volt14 says, given that Sean finds entire social science fields illegitimate, what standard of evidence would change his mind? What kind of evidence does he need? Or such scenario can't be imagined? I'll give you a chance to respond, Sean.
Yeah, so given that the question was, given that I consider social science to be trash, what kind of evidence do I need?
Roughly
what-
speaking, yep.
Right. So firstly, I should say it's not that all of social science is trash. It's just that social science is regularly done by people who, again, don't really understand what the numbers mean and can't
Who
discern
are trash.
for themselves whether or not it's trash particularly well. I mean, I can give you there are basic guidelines for determining, if research is trustworthy. It is the statistical power of the research high? Are the p-values of the findings hanging around 0.05? If so, that's a major red flag. I mean, there's a bunch of things you can look at if you want to, but they're not like novel. It's not like my ideas. It's just the way to do it. It's not something. It's not like my opinion. And then about the trans stuff specifically, well, for one, just the most obvious thing, right, would be that if it just was not the case, that people who have gone further with these desires tend to have higher rates of suicide attempt. The people who have not, I mean, that obviously would cause a change in my view. Just the reverse of the evidence I cited. I don't know. It seems like kind of an obvious answer, but I'm not sure what else to say.
This one coming in from Turbo says, Xander, do you truly believe that the difference between a real and fake vagina is, quote, purely aesthetic, unquote?
I mean, if you're having sex with it, yeah, probably. I mean, I don't think that most people, when they have sex, are doing it to procreate. So that's not really a matter of the question, I think, most of the time. But yeah, I'd say probably if you're just having sex with a surgically created vagina and a, like, biologically created vagina, then they're probably going to feel and look mostly the same, probably.
You got it, Anne. Thank you very much.
Do you mind if I add one extra little detail about that? This is actually really interesting. And I learned about this about a year ago watching a Blair White video. Blair White had claimed that trans women couldn't get cervical cancer, which makes sense, right? Like, okay, well, all right, trans women probably can't get cervical cancer. And I ended up looking into it. As it turns out, trans women who've gotten bottom surgery can get cervical cancer in the neocervix, the new cervix created by the surgery. So if you're a trans person out there and if you're a trans woman and you've gotten bottom surgery, definitely get checked, just like you would a cis woman. Get checked for cancer in that area, because it can happen just like it could to a cis woman.
You got it, and this one coming in from Zap Rising says, is Sean aware of Alden's fallacy on trans issues?
Alden's fallacy?
I think that's a meme. I think it's a Vosh meme, if I remember.
Anything with Alden in it is a Vosh meme.
Right, that's referencing when the kid was asked about like Alden's number.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this meme. So
this one coming in from Saint Beloved Appreciate It says, X, do you believe a large part of the trans suicide rate is because not many are attracted to trans people, and of those who are, they are not the best?
Not really. No, that would be insane to me. Like the idea that like just a lack of attraction would be like I don't know. That sounds like a little bit too incel for me. I think probably bullying and societal acceptance is probably a stronger explanation for that. But I mean, I don't even agree with the premise there. I think I mean, there's no data on this for sure, but if you go on Twitter, I see those trans women thirst posting for each other like crazy. And there's also some really, pretty good-looking trans people out there. There's some handsome trans men, some beautiful trans women out there that I've seen. So I don't know if I don't necessarily agree with the premise.
You got it. This one coming in from Ben Dover says, sex is an immutable biological reality. Gender is a social construct built upon biological realities to create social cohesion and cooperation. Social constructs exist because they work and they ought to be enforced.
Social constructs exist because we created them. Just the existence of social constructs and the fact that we have them isn't in it of itself. As this person said, evidence that it's a good thing. Racism is a social construct. The concept of like black and white people, Asian, etc. Like these are concepts that we've categorized ourselves. There's no like stone tablets deep in some ancient magical ruins that we dug up that said, oh yeah, by the way, this is where all the races are, the races and ethnicities, and this is like the boundaries of what nations and what geographical areas they exist in. That's just not how it works. We socially constructed these ideas because at the time we thought they served either some service or they made things simpler. Maybe at the time they did. But just because we had those social constructs doesn't make them good. I would hope most people watching don't think racism is good. That's a social construct. We're trying to get rid of that. That's just, I don't think just because we made a thing means that it's good, and we ought to keep it around.
You got it. This one coming in from Temp Account says, can you ask Sean to maybe clarify his argument? Why does trans people being suicidal for biological reasons support not affirming trans identities? Seems there are missing steps.
Sure. So the reason is that it seems to be the case. I mean, there are two things. One, that among trans people, there's a continuum of suicidality, and it tends to be higher among those people who have most pursued the desire in various respects. And so, hopefully, that you can say you don't think that's true because X, Y, and Z. But if that was true, hopefully you can see why. Then you would want to discourage people from leaning into that desire. And then in the second place, as we talked about before, there's not a lot of good data telling us one way or the other, but I think it's certainly a plausible possibility that transgenderism being affirmed socially increases the number of people who are transgender, and that in turn spreads human suffering as well. So hopefully that clears it up a bit.
You got it. And this one from Temp account as well. This one for you, Xander, says, during the, can you ask Xander Hall, during the AMA, what it means to be a man/woman in the sense trans people use it? Can he define those terms in a non-recursive way?
Sure. So if you ask a progressive person or somebody who's part of the trans community what their gender is or what their identity means, what's it mean to be a man, what's it mean to be a woman, what's it mean to be non-binary, you're going to get a lot of very different answers because it means something different to, frankly, everybody. But broadly speaking, I think you'd find a very common answer of it's a man, someone who identifies as a man, a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. And while categorically that is in fact true, sex is the sex, like sex has to do with your biology, gender has to do with when the doctor takes you out and sees what kind of genitalia you have, they assign you a gender based on your sex, right? You're just kind of raised with it, that's what you end up with. By societal standards, we've got plenty of different things that we consider to decide what is a man and what is a woman. But from someone on the left, you would try to break down those standards to have a more libertarian, free society without the bonds of social expectations and everybody forcing them to live their lives in a certain way. It's sort of, you get to make your own life. You get to make your own identity. You get to make you decide who you are, not society. That's generally the left-wing goal behind breaking down our conceptions of gender.
You got it. And there's one last question. I think I might have lost it. Give me two seconds. Ryan Secord, I think partly meant to be trolling, but we'll give you a chance if you want to address it in terms of whether or not they literally are raising this objection. They say, for Xander Hall, can Sean identify as the winner of the debate? And this might be a chance for you to, what your position would be in terms of the differences in terms of identifying as a person who won a debate versus identifying as a man or a woman. If they are serious, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So identity and gender identities, depending on who you ask, you'll get very different answers, as I mentioned before. If we really want to get radical with it, and this is a very radical perception, though I do tend to agree with it more, the argument made by those that are a bit more radical on the left is usually that gender is entirely socially constructed. That we've just noticed that there's a general sort of bimodal distribution in sexual characteristics, and we've sort of assigned a social label to that we use in our society, and that social label has sort of grown a certain amount of expectations went along with it. When it comes to new genders, new identities, which identifying as the winner of X debate would qualify as if it was done so in sincerity. I mean, technically that could be a new gender identity if it was accepted by a certain social space. That's all our gender identities are, after all. The only reason why we use boy, girl, man, woman is because we've normalized it. Otherwise, we might be using just male or female or some other distinction for categorization of people's sexual identity, right? Or sexual identity, how they were assigned at birth, or whatever. I think it has to do with the sincerity. I don't like setting a precedent for trying to analyze the reasons for why a trans person identifies the way that they do. I think whether or not we accept that person and whether or not that person is acting in good faith is something we can just kind of determine based on their other actions. And if there's some crazy pedophile who's pretending to be trans or whatever to try to touch kids at some book event, I think we should condemn that person for being a pedophile, not for being trans. And I know that's been something that people bring up. I think it has to do with the sincerity of it. If Sean legitimately identified their sexual identity or their gender identity as the winner of the debate, then I guess I'd say I'd accept it. I'd accept it if it was genuine.
Really?
You got it. And this question coming in hot from Saint Beloved says, Xander, what age should kids be introduced into a trans lifestyle? What age is appropriate for the trans talk?
Trans talk and being introduced to a trans lifestyle. You doing all right? You all right, Sean?
I don't get the joke,
Oh?
but we'll give you a chance to respond, Xander.
Yeah, I didn't pick up anything funny from that question. So I'm gonna leave that to smarter minds than me. But from the research that I've done, it seems like when it comes to social transitioning, as long as like it's to the discretion of like whatever medical professional has done the discussions and the psychological analysis of the child in question. This just isn't up to me. I don't have the experience or the knowledge to be able to make that decision. Seems like around the age of speaking is around when doctors are able to like get a decent gauge on the mindset of whoever they're talking to, and that's usually when it's recommended for a gender experiencing minor to start dressing differently or calling themselves something different. Maybe around the age of 10 or 11, that's when medical professionals will advise the introduction of hormone blockers, assuming that so far the long-term analysis of this individual has resulted in like, you know, just socially transitioning has worked out for them. Then they can upgrade to hormone blockers, which are not hormones. They just sort of delay puberty for a while, and that's done to ensure that the person in question doesn't experience the wrong puberty. If they like, let's say we have a trans woman on our hands and they're like, this trans girl is like 10 years old. Now, it's possible that when they end up being 13, 14, 15, 16, they realize, nope, it was all a phase. I'm not actually trans. I'm a boy. It was just, I like playing with dresses. I like wearing dresses. I like playing with dolls. That's just what I liked. Never mind. Never mind. False alarm. The hormone blockers basically allow for a bit more time without the downside of during that time experiencing a more harder to reverse puberty, incorrect puberty, right? And so obviously in most cases, the vast majority of cases, I should clarify, hormone blockers can be reversed. We put kids on hormone blockers for other things all the time, such as they're like just any issues having to do with hormones, one of them being a pituitary gland issues. I had a friend in school who was on hormone blockers for that. And then, of course, down the road, once adulthood is reached, and I believe in the UK specifically, you have to live a year, like a few years maybe, identifying as the gender that, like as trans and being out as trans in society. Then I believe doctors in the UK, and I think that step is skipped in the US, once like the age of adulthood or like 16, 17 around there is reached, then hormones can be introduced. So that seems to be the process now, and I mostly agree with it. I don't see any issues with that process.
You got it. Now, before we wrap up, Sean, I don't know, maybe you're looking at something in chat, and maybe, so I don't want to assume too much in case you were laughing about something else, and maybe you didn't know that you were not muted. So if you have something to say, though, I'm willing to explore it before we wrap up, because we've got a good amount of time yet. Sean, thoughts on this, Sean, and then, of course, we'll give you a chance to respond, Xander Hall, in case Sean does have anything.
Can you hear me right now?
Now yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I thought I was muted before. I apologize for that, all of that laughter. No, to be honest, I wasn't even listening that hard to what he was answering. I realized that I wasn't muted, and I was just laughing into the mic, such that people could hear me. Obviously, I don't agree with like encouraging kids to do the trans thing, but this is like way down the road, because
there's
if I don't
so many
agree,
layers. I know, right? Like, because like if we're gonna agree on like kids being able to transition, then there's so many like fundamental layers beneath that before we like. We'd have to start by agreeing on like the data, like whether or not the data that's out there right now that affirms trans people or doesn't affirm trans people. We'd have to agree on whether or not that is conclusive. Then we'd have to agree on whether or not trans people like philosophically ought to be recognized by whatever identity. And then way up that tower of agreement, we can get to, okay, now should we let kids transition? There's just so many like, we'd have to have
it'd be pretty
so many
weird if I was
conversations.
like, let's discourage adults from doing it, but it's cool if kids do. That would be a very strange position.
Yeah, there's a few too many layers of disagreement we have there for that discussion, I think.
You got it. This last one coming in from Mango T. Last second question says, Xander, do you believe that your sexual identity is a test should you overcome it? I could have sworn someone else asked that too.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming that might be a meme, maybe from Sean's community or something. No, I don't think it's a test. I don't really think that how you're born is a test that you need to overcome. Even if you're trans, I don't think how you're born is a test that you're overcoming. I think when you're trans and you're transitioning both socially and physically and maybe surgically and whatnot, you're not overcoming a test that was put forward towards you or whatever. That's your journey. Okay. Everybody has a journey in their life. Everybody's life journey is different. Everybody has their own experience and everything. And in your particular life journey, you are going to experience a cavalcade of change to yourself, and you're going to come out of it almost a different person. And that's a good thing, if that's what you want.
You got it. And with that, want to say, folks, we really do appreciate you hanging out with us. Thanks so much for all of your questions, as that makes the Q&A fun. And especially, though, thanks to our guests. It's been a true pleasure to have you. Sean and Xander Hall, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
I
really appreciate you having me on. And I had a really fun conversation. Thank you for talking to me, Sean.
Yeah, appreciate it as well.
100%. And want to remind you guys, folks listening out there, our guests are linked in the description, and that includes if you're listening via the Modern Day Debate podcast. And with that, we'll be back in just a moment with upcoming debates to talk about, as well as I am very excited. I had already mentioned it before, my dear friends. We are thrilled for the first.
Yep.
Having like the pendulum swinging from 51-49, where people are so diametrically opposed on everything, isn't going to be enough to get anything passed. And maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe those polarization problems that exist in society, maybe that's what needs to be addressed, rather than trying to find some system that makes it so that like 50.001% of the people can immediately enact all sorts of widespread changes that are just going to be rolled back and 180'd on the next election cycle.
Are you for the divorce, Destiny? Are you for the peaceful divorce?
There is no such thing as a peaceful divorce.
This
isn't even philosophically wrong. This is just absolutely wrong. You support the system by living and existing here. That's how the system is supported. Absolutely true. If every single libertarian country stopped voting.
Topic 1. Should either politicians or parties put their support behind politically toxic causes? For instance, should a politician fight for gun law reform in a pro-gun state? Or should a Democratic president have come out for gay marriage before there was popular support? Are parties strictly for the purpose of putting political wins on the board, which means they should only support the should bet? Or is there importance for parties to move the needle on unpopular issues? Yeah. So this is a thing. It's something we've argued about plenty of times, right? Whether like there's a whole list of these things, these issues that I'm sure you can obviously come up with that people have fought for, especially on the activist level, right? And we argue, why aren't politicians doing this? Or when they do this, we're like, why are they doing this? Because it's popular, right? So I wanted to, like, what is really the purpose of these things, right? And should we expect politicians to take, for instance, like a brave stance? If this is like, if your principles lead you to believe this, should you be taking a brave stance, even if the public is not here yet? All right, opening statements, keep them short. All right, we'll start. Peace go.
Yeah, I think that it's very important for our constitutional system that certain politicians not be completely 100% responsive to input from the polity. That's one of the reasons why, for instance, the Senate has longer periods for election, is precisely because our framers, and I think any good institutional designer, recognize that sometimes elected officials and representatives cannot just merely follow the whims of a polity that can, where favor can turn like the wind. And so I think that while I obviously think that elected officials should be somewhat responsive to democratic impulse, I don't think it should be perfectly mapped on. And what's more is, I do think that elected officials have a duty and an ethical duty to try to move the country and their wherever their constituency is in a direction that is ethical. And they have a capability of doing so too. Just because our democracy is responsive, and just because elected officials tend to, by and large, sort of go along with the desires of their people, though not perfectly so, I think the inverse is true, and that politicians can have effect on their electorates. Just look at Donald Trump, who has had a massive effect, I think, in terms of political opinion in the Republican Party, and he himself has moved sort of their political desires as well. So it's a two-way street, and yes, elected officials should be responsive, but not perfectly so.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I think Bernie Sanders is an amazing person for kind of pushing the Overton window. I don't like some of the leftists and some of the idiots that have come forward, but ultimately I do think that he kind of pushed a bunch of ideologies that I think were really good and were against the status quo. And so I think those sorts of things are beneficial, even if those things are not necessarily whatever. But I do think that there is strategy that needs to be implemented, right? And there are plenty of times where a politician has to vocalize something that can harm the party. We saw that when it came to the 2016 election with certain politicians kind of losing seats or at least seeming like there was some backlash because of maybe their endorsement of some leftist policies, like defund the police and things like that. So ultimately, I think it's a great thing, but it does need to be done responsibly.
Thank you. Counterpoints.
Yeah, what Pisco said. It's both. I don't like saying it's one or the other. And on top of that, some of the most memorable and powerful things that have been done in American history have been done by people who are outside of the Overton window. If you think about Abraham Lincoln, if you think about, kind of as they brought up, like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders hasn't changed anything policy-wise, but at the same time, he shifted the Overton window in the American conversation. I don't think that it is enough for elected representatives just to be the passive, zeitgeist of poll research within their districts. I think that they should help form the culture. And this actually kind of goes exactly to the Trump example, where in the Trump example, we had a bunch of Republicans who are going along with the zeitgeist, whereas if they maybe took a stand or actually had some kind of principled position that didn't necessarily make sense from an electoral standpoint, maybe they could have helped mitigate some of the damage that we've seen over the past few years. So I'll leave it there, and I'm looking forward to the open.
Thank you. Just Destiny.
Yeah, same answers. I don't know if we're going to find a lot of disagreement here, but I mean, politicians in some ways are responsible for representing the will of their electorate, but depending on the seat that you hold or the position that you're in, you might be able to push politically a little bit more than somebody else can. I wish people would recognize this reality a little bit more. I don't expect Manchin to push a progressive agenda very much in the United States because he doesn't have the opportunity to, but AOC can definitely push much farther left than another politician could, and I think that that type of pushing, even if it might not be safe for somebody in a vulnerable district to do, can still be valuable overall because it kind of shapes and moves the entire national discourse, and then eventually can get us closer to those policies. So yeah, I think it's cool when people are both kind of like politicians and political activists at the same time. It just depends on where their district is and the type of seat they hold.
Lucas.
I mean, so this idea that there have been political participants that have been staying true to their principles, it's kind of ridiculous in my opinion. I mean, Trump was ran as a pro-war president, and he still bombed the shit out of Yemen. Abraham Lincoln wasn't running against slavery. That wasn't one of the things that he wanted to abolish. But yeah, I mean, I think political people should definitely stay true to their principles. I'm a libertarian. One of the reasons that I'm a libertarian is because the Libertarian Party, even before it was popular around this country, they were defending, they were against police brutality. They were against broken windows police. Wait, no, sorry. What's it called? Jesus Christ, I forgot. Sorry. But yeah, basically, I think politicians should definitely stay true to their principles, and the reason they don't do it is because they don't really care about it. They don't really have principles, and they just say whatever they want. They have to say to get in office.
Gappy.
I don't think it's as doomer as people put it that way. I think politicians do actually have principles, and I think Destiny makes a good point in the sense that they have to represent their constituency. At the end of the day, politicians want to win. They want to get reelected, and the policies that win in places like the Bronx and New York 14th isn't going to be the same types of policies that win in like the West Virginia Senate. When we look at the current situation where the balance of power is like on such a razor thin edge, I think at that point it does become very critical and crucial as a party to emphasize that element of unity and trying to win seats over just trying to like push for your policies. But that's kind of like an edge case. Most of the time it's usually not like that. And I think as a politician, you do have an obligation to try and push for what's best for your community. I mean, that's why earmarking is a thing. That's why blog rolling is a thing. Politicians do it all the time, and to suggest that politicians don't do that, or that they're only in it because they're just lying and they'll say whatever they want to get elected, that's just not true, unless we're implying that every single voter is just a dumbass.
Yes! Endelig! Oh shit, it's lang tid.
I think I'm a little bit on the fence on this topic. I think on one hand, I agree that, you know, it's important for leaders to step up and to support good causes, even if there's like a good chance that they'll get backlash, because their voices on the national stage can be powerful catalysts for change. But on the other hand, I don't know if it would be like beneficial for someone like Obama to undermine his campaign by supporting like a politically volatile topic like gay marriage, you know, at the time he was running for election. That might have ended up with us having McCain in office, which would have probably been a really awful shit show. Even with the U.S.'s pre-Trump, right? We probably would have been bombing fucking McCain. Iran at the time if we'd ended up with something like that. So I'm like, right now it can be moved either way, but I'm leaning toward what seems to be the more pragmatic option, even if it's last principle.
Okay, Scott.
I think there are a couple interesting elements to this conversation. One of the questions that's kind of begged within the question itself is like, are we a democracy or are we a constitutional republic, right? And part of the point of being a constitutional republic is that politicians aren't necessarily beholden to like a kind of 51% or 60% majority of what their district supports or doesn't support, right? Before the 17th of the amendment, right? Like the framers of the Constitution, so I'm just fixing my camera a little bit. They understood this, and this is why the House of Representatives was supposed to be directly elected by the population, and part of the reason why the Senate was supposed to be elected by the states, right? It would make sure that the federal government didn't grow, that they respected states' rights, but also so that like things that might be ridiculous but are popular by the majority of people could be shut down, or things that might not necessarily be popular by the majority of people but are good from like a policy perspective would get boosted forward, right? Of course, as an anarchist, I think it's all trash, right? But you kind of have to work towards the direction that you want to go. I also think too that we're maybe having this conversation a little disingenuously about the American public voting for politicians. Sure, there are cults of personality like AOC or Trump or Bernie Sanders, right? That garner votes because of who they are. But a lot of people vote down party ticket, right? They don't even know who their senator is or who their House of Representatives member is, or especially their state people. And so the idea that you can stray too far away from the party politics and like not cause like some issues, right, is going to be some concern, because a lot of people are voting for a party and not necessarily voting for an individual. And obviously we can have some, more detailed discussions about that as the panel opens up.
Open panel.
God. Just pushing back on one small thing. This is a bit of a deviation, but tiny thing. I just don't believe that Abraham Lincoln like really pushed the Overton window. There was all sorts of conversations specifically about the abolition of slavery. There was like entire abolition movement, which was largely Christian. But anyway, that had already been existing. I don't think like Abraham Lincoln was specifically responsible for that.
I don't think the argument would be necessarily that he like single-handedly moved it, but just that with a president, it maybe could have gone either way. Not to say that there wasn't like some inevitability that we were moving in a certain direction in regards to slavery and everything in the United States, but maybe him being there at that time moved it. Somebody brought up the point, kind of comparable to that, to Obama, that like if Obama was like pushing things that were just like big political points and maybe necessarily weren't the most popular, that we would have had McCain. I mean, we can argue that presidents do this when they throw their weight behind an agenda that might be divisive in the future. I think this is one of the reasons why presidents lose their houses so oftentimes in the second part of their term. You can arguably, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, was why Obama lost his House majority after the passage of that, right? Because so much political capital was expended on that. Or I think I've heard things saying that like the assault weapons ban provision in the 93 crime bill or whatever, affected Clinton's majorities in the House and Senate as well. So, I mean, I think there are times where people like lean into something that they don't have to, but they choose to because either it's a political calculation or it is a value, and it still ends up costing them a bit in the future as well.
Obama also made some hard choices. If you read his book, he talks about how, the decision to support the Afghanistan war, which he sort of recognized as the quote good war, it wasn't easy as a matter of being synchronized with the Democrats. And so I reject the notion that Obama was a pure populist, totally responsive to only popular opinions at the time. He made some hard choices, and indeed Obamacare itself, I think, was an act of political calculus, which ultimately hurt him in the elections. But looking at the options in front of us, I think in hindsight was the right choice.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point, is like, you know, if you only do what's politically expedient, you're going to be a toothless politician, and you might as well have not existed in the first place. Besides being representative of some polling data, and when we think about like, I don't necessarily like great men in politics, but you can't deny the impacts of certain people. So while like I'll admit that like. What is it, like Abraham Lincoln might not have single-handedly started like the abolition movement or whatever. I still think there's something to be said for the fact that like it takes a little bit of balls to order an army into 50% of your country to, you know, basically like slash and burn it in the name of politics. So like that, you know, that's where I think we've kind of become accustomed to wars being like really far away and kind of the consequences of political actions to be further away from us. But the truth is that these things do have a lot going on with them, and it's kind of easy to wash your hands of it and say, like, fuck it. Like, you know, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but I think that's like a point of privilege for us that we're able to say that shit in this day and age.
Sure, I wasn't dismissing like him having like any importance or any relevance and all of that stuff. Like, I'm just saying I don't think he pushed the Overton window per se. But sure, he had obviously all of the significance. Like, you know, the Emancipation proclamation that he signed was actually super duper important. His willingness to like actually stay in the Civil War, all these things were like really, really great things. You know, his motivation was probably to preserve the Union, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Like, he had an insane impact. So I wasn't pushing back against any of those things.
I'm curious, Fabian, and I guess Lucas as well. You guys must be extremely fearful of the tyranny of the majority. Would you in America be in favor of moving away from direct election of senators? You mentioned that, Fabian.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would personally be in favor of repealing the 17th Amendment. Yeah.
This is the one where your state legislative bodies used to appoint the senators, right? Instead of it being.
Yes.
Dude, is there an argument against that? This is kind of off topic. That seems so base because it seems like it makes you way more invested in your state level elections as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think
That was the goal of it. Yeah.
I mean, the repeal. I'm sorry. The instantiation of the 17th Amendment eventually led to the 1990s kind of. Oh my God, who was the big Republican that was up against Bill Clinton? That was the majority leader. Oh my gosh.
Newt Gingrich?
Yes, Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich understood because of that what we could do is we could make local elections national, right? That was how he took in 1994 or 92. Sorry, the off-year election after 94. So the off-year election after Clinton, right? He realized that what we needed to do was start pushing national politics at a local stage. And because we have become so divested from local politics, most people don't even vote in local elections because they feel like it has no relevance to them, despite the fact that local elections are way more important to their lives, right? It's almost like psychologically, it's almost the exact opposite because most people aren't that invested in politics. And I think the reason I bring that up is because I believe that the founding fathers understood that they were trying to craft a government that kind of had like every element of like Plato's, ideal government types, right? Like you have the philosopher king in the executive presidency, right? Like you have the democracy within the House. You have kind of like the oligarchy in a sense in the Senate, right? And so it's supposed to be not just a balance of like, checks and balances between different houses of government or between the federal and the state level, but also between different types of government, right? That was part of the idea of having an unelected Senate, but mostly it was there to preserve states' rights, right? To keep the federal government from getting too large.
Can I challenge that for a moment? I mean, are you really putting the fact that we have been more worried, and I agree with you that like I would say that people more identify in terms of their national citizenship than their state citizenship. Are you putting that on the heels of repealing the fact that we have direct elections of senators? I mean, or that we enacted that amendment?
We could have like a whole fucking like 3-hour discussion on the 17th Amendment, and I'm sure that would be fascinating, right? I know I'm not putting it solely on the heel of one thing. I'm saying it's one factor, right?
I think that was coming no matter what. The Civil War, I think.
I mean, yeah, no, before the Civil War, for example, people used to say that they were from Virginia. Now they say from the United States. As a matter of fact, the vocabulary of the United States changed. People used to say the United States of America are a good place to live. And then after the Civil War, they had said the United States of America is a good place to live, right? So, I mean, obviously the Civil War probably had more of an impact. I'm simply mentioning one thing
but I think
I'm not even talking about people identifying. That was something Destiny brought up, not what I brought up. I'm talking about the fact that people are invested whether or not they're invested in local elections and their relevancy, and whether or not they're more invested in federal elections.
But you are in favor of repealing that amendment, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that what that would produce is just an enormous shift of a balance of power, even more than it is already, to rural voters who are already being able to take advantage of, I think, totally unjustifiable gerrymanders and the kind of finagling in the states just on the nth degree. And I think we already have way too much sort of disproportionate power in the hands of rural voters in this country.
I mean, you could say that, and that'd be interesting, and I'd love to debate you on that. But again, that strays away from the topic of the question at hand, which is the idea of whether or not politicians should be supporting things that are necessarily toxic to their candidacy or differing from their party, right? And the reason I bring this up is an idea that this is one of the things that inspired the founding fathers and the framers of the Constitution to create the Senate separate from direct elections.
Yeah, but I would say nowadays, a lot of the country, I would say including the presidency, are not responsive enough to democracy. Some of these, I think, archaic systems in place that the framers constructed, such as the Electoral College.
Wait, are you in favor of direct democracy?
I mean, in terms of the presidency, I'm very much against the Electoral College. I think it's absolutely unjustifiable.
Yeah, I mean that's just fucking cope because you don't like the way the country is done. No one with it that's actually seriously thought about it wants presidents only in Eastern Seaboard major cities.
Yeah,
campaigning.
That's not what the Electoral College.
Giving a fuck about rural areas.
That's not, right? I mean, that's not what the Electoral College doesn't seem to do. What do you think the Electoral College does?
I mean, it's to instantiate that rural individuals and people from smaller states have more power in our election processes.
It's smaller
so that we don't.
It's smaller states.
Yeah.
And so rural voters in California,
rural voters,
but it's not based on that. It's based on the fact that you're a small state. You proportionally get more votes.
Pisco's already apparently trying to practice being a prosecutor, man, because he's ready to fight ghosts and get away from the topic.
Well, I think it's a little bit unfair to say that the Electoral College is like a necessary institution that needs to exist to protect like rural interests when we already have like the Senate, right? You can argue that there's a lot of overlap there in terms of what they accomplish because the Senate also automatically disproportionately favors smaller states, but the Senate explicitly disproportionately favors smaller states, which you can argue is good or bad. The Electoral College doesn't necessarily do that because doesn't necessarily favor like rural voters as you would claim you'd want it to, because like Pisco said, rural voters in California aren't getting any more representation, or rural voters in any solidly blue state aren't getting any more representation. I think there's legitimate arguments on both sides of that.
And the topic is really the essence of the topic is about the responsiveness of our elected officials to the polity. And what this does is shift essentially who the polity is and how much say each member of whatever polity you're talking about gets. And so I think the Electoral College is relevant to the essence of the question.
Yeah, and FLS, like, I don't think we should rigidly stick to the topic if we all fucking agree. If we can go onto a fucking tangent where we start yelling at each other, I think that's fine.
I have some disagreements with the topic, right? I think I introduced this idea that like most Americans are voting down party ticket, right? They're voting because someone has a D or an R next to their name. Right, most people don't live in AOC's district. Right?
This is like a creationist fallacy or whatever kind of, where like people exist on the planet Earth, because God made them to be, rather than, well, maybe people developed to exist on Earth because that's how the Earth is, right? When you say that like everybody happens to vote for the same party, sure, that's true, but that's because people in the same party also tend to share the same beliefs as well, right? So we can't just say that people only down ballot vote because they're only looking for the DDR, and even if they are,
it's not a creationist fallacy.
Well, even if
look at Virginia right now.
Yeah, because even if that's true that they do down ballot vote, which they do a lot, they could be because there's shared beliefs there,
which is the majority of voters.
Sure, but that also there are breaks from that as well, and we saw that in the last election cycle where there were districts that Trump like massively carried where that down ballot effect didn't happen, or there were districts where Biden won where that down ballot effect did not happen as much too. So I think people will break there.
You're talking about a small group of independent voters, right? But what I'm saying is a majority of Americans, right? And
the majority of Americans
conceded this. A majority of Americans support a political party, and they tend to support that political party almost no matter who.
Sure, but let's just think about what you're saying. A majority of Americans that would vote for a Democratic president would also vote for like a Democratic governor, or a Democratic House of Representatives, or a Democratic congressman, or a Democratic senator, right? That's to be expected, right? Like we would expect to see that. Even if everybody was analyzing every single individual politician.
Right, but we know from exit polls, right? Like it's a commonly known thing. Like let's not pretend that this isn't
What is a commonly known thing?
Where
They're
people
willing to
go to a
stray from
presidential election, they vote for president, and they have no fucking idea who the rest of the people are that they're voting. And that's a large portion of the American public, right? They're just voting because they believe in a party's platform, at least to a certain extent, right? And so when you deviate heavily from that party platform, right, in a certain way, you do have to understand that you're going to catch shit, right? Because you may actually be deviating from what the electorate voted you for.
Talk to Hamilton. Talk to Madison. I mean, these are the framers.
Don't go to someone's website and look at their fucking positions.
This has been the case for
so then
centuries.
these voters aren't just like voting down ballot blindly. Clearly, if someone strays from the platform too far, they're going to be moving from it. We saw it with Nina Turner. We saw it with that India Walton person in Buffalo who completely lost to a fucking write-in candidate from a guy who retired because they absolutely hated her platform, even though she was Democrat.
Outliers.
I don't think voters
is not an argument against.
But the fact that there is such strong sways between someone being Democrat versus a literal write-in candidate, I think goes to show that voters are not as absolutely fucking stupid people. If anything, as these elections get more and more local, where there's less turnout,
I didn't say that.
Nobody said that they were stupid. You are always fighting Ghost. Why are you saying that he said that voters are stupid? He never said that.
I mean, we're implying that voters just kick down and go fucking down ballot all the time. They're not fucking capable of actually thinking.
That doesn't mean they're stupid.
They weren't capable, Gappy. I'm talking about the reality. This is why
shit.
socialists never fucking get anything done, because they don't live in the real world. You cited the framers. The real world. You cited the framers, Madison, who is, I think, a very important framer so far as the Constitution is concerned. Right. He thought that political parties were inevitable. That, of course, if you have shared interests are stronger together. What's the ape strong together? That's the line. And so he, at least for him, he tried to limit faction. If you read the Federalist Papers, he tried to do what he could to limit the effect of faction, the effect of political parties. But they were in some sense inevitable. And right after Washington's presidency, already it was breaking down, and the party's system was emerging. And I do think it's important to people that aren't, maybe that aren't American or anything, when talking about the Federalist Papers, a lot of them are propaganda. Not to say like that's necessarily a negative thing, but the Federalists are arguing for, a version of the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists are arguing for another, right? So it's not necessarily the same as like letters to other individuals about their thoughts or their diaries or things like that, right? Like they're kind of putting their best foot forward in terms of supporting their political stance in the Federalist Papers.
I mean, this is going to be basically, that's a description of almost all political writings to some extent, right? Like even we could say personal letters or people
fair and frame it.
Sure.
Did you thought that the Federalist Papers were infallible and that it actually is a truth of the universe, that
like a treatise on the thoughts of Madison or whatever
you cited the framers and their ingenuity in perfecting and crafting the system, and I'm merely suggesting to you. I'm an anarchist. Well, I'm sorry. Well, at least you pointed their ingenuity as a reason, as a rationale for why it made sense to have this split between the Senate and the House of Representatives. All I'm saying is it seems like a lot of countries have a tendency toward political parties, and I don't know that that's inherently a horrible thing, so long as you try to sort of limit the horrible externalities that I would agree with you, I think, are present, which include I'm just trying to get to the nuanced position that, like, a political party, like when people say, oh, it's okay for people to stray away from a political party, right, and follow their principles. I mean, I'm all for it, right? Like, my ethics are virtue ethics and deontological. Like, I'm not a consequentialist, right? Like, I don't give a fuck about going to the party platform. At the same time, I do think it's important to understand that a lot of American voters, right, they feel intrinsically tied to a political party in terms of what they want their politics doing, and not necessarily to individuals, right? And so when certain people break away, you get this idea, and you see it from people on social media, or when it's the left, and they do it in news or outlets, organizations, right? This idea of like calling a politician a traitor, right? And it's like, because a Republican decided to vote for a bump stock bill, or because a Democrat decided that like they didn't want to vote for a healthcare bill because they're like, dude, I'm in fucking West Virginia, like that's not gonna fucking fly, or they're just principled and like they're a blue dog Democrat or a 90s Democrat and they're a little different, right? You see this idea of like, oh, they're a traitor to the party, because a lot of people do feel, I mean, like Destiny himself showed up in fucking Georgia. He's not from Georgia. What fucking right does he have to do to campaign in Georgia? Do you think that was an immoral action for him to go there?
because he thought it was an important election that was going to affect him, despite the fact that he didn't live in Georgia, right? So a lot of people have ideas, and was it because he deeply believed in the candidates, right? Was it because Destiny just knew these people personally? No, he went there because he thought the Democrats were better than the Republicans, right? And he
well, hold on. To be clear, I went there because the office that he's representing is a federal level office,
a national
right?
office.
Yeah,
right, exactly. So it affects you, right? And it affects you in some way, despite you not even being a part of that electorate.
Well, but I am a part of. Well, I think that's kind of a weird thing in terms of am I part of that electorate or not? Because we're talking about like national level offices, right? Like I might not be a member of that state, but like the national
I'm
level
not
offices.
trying to talk shit on you, Dustin.
Sure. No, I know you're not. I'm just saying that like I think that there is. I think the interest is there is a bit different than like electing somebody on like a state level election or like a city level election. I think it's a bit different, but.
Right. So, we're talking about the renegade from the party or whether or not people support the party.
Yeah, but I think that so the renegade stuff happens more. I think the reason why people feel that renegade stuff happens more is because on a national level, we run into some of the problems where if you are a Democrat or a Republican, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're aligning 100% with Democrats or Republicans from across the country, because these Democrats and Republicans are delivered from very different electorates, sometimes even within their own states. A good example is Mark Kelly and Sinema they're from Nevada, right? Or Arizona? Nevada? Arizona. I think Arizona, right? Where you have these...
LA for Arizona.
Yes, okay. You have these, you have two senators who are both Democrats and both from that state, but their electorates are the people that vote for them, their supporters are very different, right? Where Mark Kelly is like a solid left-leaning person and Sinema is absolutely not, but the composition of their voters and the favorability and unfavorability from like Republicans, Independents, and Democrats are way different between the two, and that's even within the same state. Sorry.
Right, but what I'm saying is that there's sorry, I'll let Counter go. Don't chimp out on us, Counter.
Hey, listen.
Not yet.
Pisco asked me why I was an angry
Too
guy.
early.
I was
It's too early. Get going, Counter.
Why are you an infuriating person? You know, I think it cuts both ways. But like, no. So okay, so this is kind of where I think we're landing on this, though, is the fact that like it seems like everybody wants to encourage the renegades because we feel like the system is like entrenched in like all of this bullshit. But it also feels like the second that you stick your head out or whatever, you get it chopped off. And all I've heard for like the past like 10 or 15 minutes is all the reasons why people don't venture too outside the box because there's like shit going on. But then that's kind of the question about like democracy or Republican democracy or any of that kind of stuff. Is it responsive enough to crisis? So if you look at the global war on terror, or if you look at the drug war, or if you look at global warming, is like representative mixed economy capitalism mixed with like representative democracy, is this system up to the challenges of crises that we're seeing? Are we actually going to be able to rise above, or are we kind of fucked because basically every single time that a politician reaches out in order to break the mold, they just get their dick slapped? Like that's kind of my question: is the system even responsive enough to all these problems?
I mean, you got two anarchists on the panel. Like, obviously, no.
I mean, the reason why they're getting their dick slapped right now is because it's so tight right now in terms of control between Democrats and Republicans, right? When we're talking about things like the things like the repeal on Obamacare, the reason why it was so difficult and why, that vote no from John McCain was so serious was because of the fact that the Republicans didn't have some huge, insanely high majority where they were instantly going to pass that AHCA. It's a double-edged sword because on one hand, when you renegade in the situation like McCain did, it's so much easier for you to have so much power in the same way that Manchin did. But it also does fuck over your party, right? If we want more people to renegade and just be like, fuck it, I want to fight for whatever policies I want, the real solution is to just get a really fucking strong majority, and then from there we can do whatever the fuck we want in Congress.
But we don't agree on shit. Like that.
I have
that's
another
like,
solution.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys are just supporting the wrong fucking party.
I mean, like we can say that, but like this is
on the right side.
Yeah, but nobody.
Yeah,
I think the big problem is, and this is something I'll simp for over and over again. I think the big problem is that our political system is actually incredibly effective. Everything is working exactly as it should. The problem is that there exists. The reason why government seems so ineffective is because there is a very real polarization that exists right now in the American people that seems to be growing wider and wider apart. And if you have a government that is supposed to only be able to move, not with 51% of Americans supporting it, but in some cases it might be 60 people in the Senate supporting it, might be a majority in the House and Senate, it might be a president that won't veto something, right? If you're actually going to have a government set up like this, then having like the pendulum swinging from 51-49, 51-49, where people are so diametrically opposed on fucking everything, isn't going to be enough to get anything passed. And maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe those polarization problems that exist in society, maybe that's what needs to be addressed, rather than trying to find some system that makes it so that like 50.001% of the people can immediately enact all sorts of widespread changes that are just going to be rolled back and 180'd on the next election cycle.
Are you for the divorce, Destiny? Are you for the peaceful divorce?
There is no such thing as a peaceful divorce. It's not even a, yeah.
Come on, come on.
What is this peaceful
The
divorce?
idea that like one of the things that makes America like work so fucking well is the fact that we have 50 independent states that have such an insane level of integration, economically and geopolitically. The idea of like starting to split that up and to destroy like one of the most important aspects of what makes this country so powerful is so mind-numbingly stupid to me. And it doesn't even make sense. Like, who's going to leave? Like the red states that can't financially support themselves, or that's just it's a beyond a stupid idea. I don't know anybody that is actually floating this idea seriously, unless it's one of you guys because you're ANCAPs. But I'll still say the same.
There's tons of people floating that idea.
Yeah, it's absolutely ludicrous. There's like a million different reasons why it wouldn't work.
But hey, do you think that it's fair to say that maybe things aren't working so smoothly when there are like large amounts of position? I don't know about large amounts, but there are things that like super duper majority of Americans agree on, but we still can't get past.
I don't. People say that a lot.
Hvis mit internet det går igen.
We can't pass. But I think what happens is broadly speaking, we agree on things. But when you start to get more and more granular, that's where all the disagreements start to come out. I think a really, really good example of this could be healthcare. But we could go to the east and we could say a really good example of this is Brexit, where you barely had over half the country supporting Brexit, but nobody knew what the fuck that looked like. And in the following years, and even still arguably to today, people are trying to figure out, well, what exactly does Brexit look like? So you might be able to say, well, you know, broadly speaking, most people support this. Okay, but they support what exactly? Because like there's a lot of different granular approaches to policy, and when you start running into all these disagreements there, you find out that you don't have nearly as much support as you thought you did initially. So I reject that framing that Americans broadly support on some things that can't get passed. I just don't think that happens.
What do you have to say, Destiny, about the outsized influence that small states have in this union in our national policy, just based on the fact that Senate votes are allocated proportionally to states? And
I love
people.
it so fucking much. I
How
love
is
the
it
fact that
justifiable?
every single state in this country has a buy-in, and that every other state has a buy-in to at least keep in mind the other states when it comes to our electoral process. I think
I'm sorry, but
it's very simple. It was to try and stop the tyranny of the majority.
No, but
right? I mean, democracy is tyrannical, and we know that. Right, the framers knew that.
I don't agree that we should be responsive to. We should be responsive in our policy that like one person can have an outsized majority, can have an influence of the tyranny of the minority as opposed to tyranny of the majority.
I feel like this system works so well. Even the European Union, with the way that the European Commission and the members of Parliament of European Parliament are structured in the exact same way. Where even if you have your MEPs,
trash and you know it.
Okay, even if you have your MEPs, your members of the European Parliament that are elected like the House, where different countries get different numbers of people, that I believe that European Commission has one person from every single state, right? Or you'll see even in the United Nations for the Security Council, like one person can have a veto power. I think the idea that you're getting
these are different nations, Destiny, and you said yourself that America, in that sense, is unique, and that we're integrated in a level that I think Europe is not.
They're different nations, but okay. So hopefully there's no alt-righters watching for the Jewish conspiracy theory, right? The goal of the European Union is akin to something similar to the United States, right? You're trying to get a unified currency. Tell me if this sounds like the United States. Everybody's on a single currency. Everybody's running on the same monetary policy. The borders aren't enforced between countries because the Schengen area allows for free travel, and you're all part of a unified market that doesn't write its own legislation per country in order to trade with outsiders, right? The European Union is akin to something like the United States, right?
There's one giant difference, Destiny, which is that MEPs might be able to propose legislation under certain circumstances, but the fact of the matter is that the council can just do that whenever they find that they can, and MEPs have very little power in that regard.
Yeah, but you can argue the exact same thing. No, hold on. That you just described the United States, right?
No, the president doesn't get to fucking propose legislation and then allow Congress to vote on it, and then just wait until the Congress is fitting whatever the council says. Right?
So
it's a very different.
That is the exact same thing. So number one, presidents absolutely.
It's not the exact same thing.
It is the exact same thing because number one, I can tell you why. Okay.
Legislative agendas.
Number one, president can have legislative agendas. Number two, who the fuck cares what the House is passing if you can't get it passed through the Senate, right? We might argue that, well, there's a process by which you can write and pass legislation from the House, and that happened a lot under Trump. Pelosi was fucking rocketing so much legislation out of the House, but who the fuck cares? If you don't have a Senate, which is our version of the commission, to pass that legislation, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Maybe in name it does. Like, cool, we got a lot of like
powers that be don't fucking decide who our senators are, right? Our senators are elected after the 17th Amendment, and before the 17th Amendment, they're chosen by the states. It's uniquely different from a deontological position. It's uniquely different because of the ideas of individual liberty or the liberty of those nations. That's why Brexit left. Brexit didn't leave because they were pissed off about their fisheries, right? I mean, you can make an argument that 20 or 30% of the population was pissed off about immigration, right? That like clearly was a large motivational force for Brexit. But a lot of it comes down to ideals, enlightenment principles that we've lost in our nation.
Okay,
right?
So
like,
I don't. Okay, without getting into the weird philosophical stuff, right? So the people from the European Commission are elected members from the members of the European Parliament, right? So these are people you get elected by these member states. Right now, it would be akin to, I think, like our House of Representatives. Like once you elect them, they appoint in a representative manner somebody from the House of Representatives to the Senate. But I think that it's pretty similar at the end of the day with how it functions.
With the issue
Hvad fuck snakker han om? Som om det er Enlightenment-idealerne.
Wait, hold on, no, but the European Council is one member per state.
Brexit,
right? It would be like our issue here in America multiplied by 100, right? It would be like if California, New York, and Texas got to decide who our senators were.
For things to pass through EU legislation to pass, don't you need the sign-off of the commission that has one member per state in that commission?
Enlightenment.
So how is it different from that's essentially our system now, no?
It's not.
But do you agree with this at scale?
You're reducing it, right, and then trying to say that they're the same thing as an apology for the EU, as a means of saying Brexit is stupid or something.
No, hold on. Like, Brexit was stupid for a whole bunch of other reasons. I'm not. What I'm just saying is that
trying to say things are different, are the same, that are similar.
What I'm saying is that okay, maybe they're not exactly the same. They're close enough though that they might as well be okay. What I'm trying to say is that anytime you've got a ton of different things or organizations coming together, and these things have different populations within them, it seems to be the case that from an institutional point of view, it's good to give a one vote per type of thing. Otherwise, you wind up in areas where some of these entities that have joined that don't have as many people are completely and totally irrelevant. That's the only thing that
I would put you on that, Destiny. Can we put you on that? So suppose that everyone from Kansas, everyone in the country, except for 10 individuals in the rest of the states moves to California. Do you then think it still makes sense to maintain the same amount of senators per state in those polities?
I think it gets.
And if you say you couldn't run those states without a few people, just put in the minimum number of citizens it takes.
Yeah, so that would be my thing, because like at that point you could literally toss those states into the ocean and they wouldn't matter. But if you had the minimum number of people to run those states, yeah, I think that having every state bought in to your national legislative agenda is really important. I don't like the idea that all those states just become irrelevant because they don't have the population there to support the national agenda. But
at no amount of scale, I mean, suppose that they're just a billion people live in California and they have.
Why are you like just Destiny? Just dismiss with the argument because it's absurd. That's not happening.
No. Hold on. Wait. It's a good point.
Conclusion.
No, it's a good point because California probably has the population. No,
it's like what if
it's not? No, it's not a trolley problem. Hold on, it is a real thing that exists right now in the United States. What isn't it like a Wyoming voter has like 13 or 18 times the voting power as like a California voter? Like this is a thing that exists right now. It's not even a hypothetical. Like this is our current system. So I think it's worth addressing like the relative imbalances when you look at an institution like the Senate or the Electoral College when it comes to establishing our legislative body in the United States.
But it sounds like no amount of imbalance would change the needle for you, Destiny.
As long as everything is functional, no, not for me.
There are movements in certain states to split their states into multiple
to
pieces.
get more power. Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. So what do you think about that kind of gamesmanship? And suppose that everyone was on board in the relevant state. Or the majority
that's
of the
really.
state
I don't know how that process will look. That's
you need to have
Congress. You know what we could do? We could have a peaceful divorce in California.
No one is having a divorce. That can't happen.
Okay, can I address this really quick?
Destiny wants to force the other states into the.
You know what I'm saying? California can be its country, and the rest of us can have our own.
Okay, but there's actually like a moral argument that I don't think I brought up
Dude,
before,
Sako,
with Pisco,
says
which I
gonna
don't know if he's
concur.
going to care about, but I don't think we've discussed it before, which is basically like you're looking for the consent of those smaller people who potentially feel fucked over. So for instance, if we're talking about the EU, you could talk about like Hungary or Austria or Poland or any of these other countries who are either part of the EU or part of NATO, but they have like a disproportionate influence because of their like geopolitical or geographic history or something like that. Same thing in the United States with like Kansas or North Dakota or Nebraska or whatever. Part of the way that like when you have controversial legislation that comes through the fucking like the federal body is you say like, hey guys, this got passed with like a very clear like majority, 51 to 60% or something like that, and on top of that we already rigged the game for you, so your vote was worth 3 times that of the major member states. So I know that you were concerned about bullying, but this is the contract that we already signed, and as a result you're just going to have to abide by the rules because you got outvoted.
But I'm not worried about the tyranny of the majority right now, Connor. I'm
Yes,
worried about the
voted,
tyranny of
just
the
get-
minority. And I think that
Yes,
these,
letting bully
Destiny
rules.
might have been right, I think, in the buildup of the nation, where you really wanted buy-in from the smaller states, especially in a time when there wasn't this national character that exists today. But the extent to which we needed that two-state buy-in, and remember, that was a fickle thing back then, given the Civil War. I think that the need for that has lessened, that there is a national character that people buy into that we all mentioned at the start of this. And
how
we
does
don't
this play
need...
into toxic causes that politicians take as opposed to their political party or their constituency?
I'm sorry, let's
banning
focus
the
on
electoral-
the topic
because
that everyone
banning
wanted
the
to move off of. I mean,
no, because banning
it's all
the
the
electoral
same.
college would be toxic.
I'm just curious. I just
This
wanted
is
to
just
weave the
silly.
thread,
You're myopically focused on the single manifestation of a core essence of an idea, which is responsiveness of democracies, and you only want to talk about one particular manifestation of that issue, and an issue that was boring to all of us, and that topic we had already sort of fulfilled the conversation after openings. Do you really want us to go back to that? We all said sometimes they should be responsive and sometimes they shouldn't be. What else is there to say?
Well, there is, something to be said for sticking to the topics in a debate, or,
I'll say this.
What are you talking about?
Like, moderator, man. Holy shit. Thank you, Scott.
I was just asking the question, right?
Oh my
Like,
God. Guys,
I want to ask.
So, hey. So, guys, we like wander off all the time. All the time, right? Whatever you find it the most interesting, we'll talk about that. Doesn't matter.
Is it fair that Pisco like single-handedly brought us to this topic, though? I don't know. Did we want to talk about it? I'm so sorry. I'm done.
Like, I mean, I personally don't.
it out there, man. Like, I'm not married.
This is I literally. I don't.
Destiny just moved me. Let's change back just to frustrate me.
Does anyone here think that politicians should only look at opinion polls and then just do whatever the opinion polls say? Everyone agrees that to some extent. Okay, so then what more is there to talk about on that issue? No one here is saying.
I mean, we could talk about the fact that you guys are supporting parties, but whatever.
Is that the same topic as whether or not, in general, you should always adhere to non-toxic political positions?
Pisco, he just gave you an opportunity to make fun of the Libertarian Party for the next
he's
20
talking
minutes.
shit,
I
and
say we all take him up on
and
it.
he wants to wander too.
Wait, can I ask a question? When do people in third parties, okay? When do people in third parties concede that maybe their initiatives just aren't popular with the public, rather than making 4 million excuses for why the public just hasn't realized how good their initiatives are yet? When does that happen?
Probably because the Democrats have co-opted most of the fucking libertarian.
Let's talk about ANCAP policies. Let's talk about how you're going to enforce
Democrats
your
are trying to
private
pass
contracts.
policies that are popular. Who would have fucking guessed?
Let's
I mean, it goes exactly to Destiny's question.
ANCAP positions and how functional they
Pisco,
are.
we're trying to get to Destiny's question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I know you're trying to be a lawyer, but
Yeah, if they just heard the ANCAP argument about the age of consent, they'd be pulled over immediately, right?
See?
I mean,
Yeah.
well, I mean, we're talking about things like, how, like, for example, the Libertarian Party was against fuck, I always forget what it's called. Scott, the broken windows policing thing we were talking about earlier.
You're talking about substantive policies. You're talking about substantive political policies instead of the system that you want. I mean, I would never, if I'm trying to like talk about institutions and how I want to build my society, talk about substantive political. That's a conversation afterwards. First, you talk about how you want to set up your structures, and then you get into substantive policy. It seems weird to say, oh, my party was right about one thing, therefore my system of government is correct.
Pisco, relax for a second. What I'm saying, right, is that politicians in many ways are beholden to their political parties, right? And so, yes, there are some politicians that stray, but maybe it's time that we start having a conversation about how trash many of the Democrat and Republican parties' platforms are, and maybe the issue isn't so much about how much we want to find renegade AOC or Donald Trump individuals, right? But maybe we should be, I don't know, supporting third parties because their platforms actually support.
What is, okay, wait, what is a
Can I
third?
just say that Democrats are beating over libertarians because they co-opted libertarian policies?
Yeah, I didn't say that, Gappy. That was just
that's part of it.
Okay, hold on. So, but can we also talk about how, like, because smaller parties are, like, sometimes small and disorganized and niche, they also attract people who, like, basically don't fit into the mainstream. So, for instance, at, like, the Libertarian Party convention, I think of, like, 2016 or 2020, there was a fucking naked dude who fucking walked up on stream, and they also booed one of their representatives because he said that he wanted driver's licenses and he wanted to regulate whether or not children could go...
2016, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, or whether or not children could do heroin, and as result, I don't think, like, so for instance, if at my main party convention, you know, basically people were booing, like, driver's licenses or whether or not children could do heroin, I would say maybe we need to get our shit together so we're more taken seriously by the broader public than fuck all of y'all, you love our ideas, but you just fucking steal it and then run away with them.
I mean, I don't know why everyone's in this idea that the Democrats stole ideas. I'm simply saying that the Libertarian Party, right, most of their large platform ideas in the 70s and 80s are now the DNC's positions, right? Like being anti-war. Libertarians have always been anti-war, being against the drug war.
All you're doing here is making all you're doing
is based on what's most popular.
Yeah, these arguments,
like the policies change on that.
and these arguments right now are making strong arguments for why two-party systems not only are incredibly resilient and strong, but maybe even should be. Because what you're showing right now is that if there are ideas that become slightly popular in third parties, that they will just be co-opted and represented in the larger main two political parties. So what's the problem?
I don't disagree with that, and I'm not saying that's wrong.
You should, though, because they only adopt them symbolically in order to gain the fucking base, and then they actually don't follow. Democrats, anti-war? Come on. Like, are we serious?
And stuff like that. Which one is it?
Wait, hold on, why do we say come on when we compare, like, what the fuck? Like, Bush got us into fucking Afghanistan and Iraq,
Republicans
and,
aren't
like,
anti-war either.
What?
Republicans are anti-war either.
Which is it? Are Democrats anti-war, or were you wrong about saying they co-opted the libertarian position?
Pro-war.
Okay, so
Republicans and Democrats are both pro-war.
Why did you say they co-opted their position if they're pro-war? Didn't you just say that they took the libertarians' anti-war stance? You were wrong about that, right?
No,
you just said they're pro-war.
It's what kind of was saying.
Rhetoric. Yeah.
That's what I said. Pisco.
Oh, sorry, did you say that they took the libertarian peace position? Did you say that?
You're conflating.
Yes, lawyer.
Did you say that? Okay, you did say that, and now you just said they're pro-war, right?
Pisco, I'm not taking your bullshit cloud chasing where you're going to take what I'm saying, right? And
then just, words you say and see if they're not consistent.
It's cross-examination. That's what it is.
And then trying to add them together, right? I said that libertarians were on the right side.
How do you possibly look at those two things and say they're consistent? That the Democrats...
I'm not an idiot, Pisco.
Okay, so explain to me how peace and war have come together to form a
straw man of shit I didn't say. Just fucking...
Didn't you say the Democrats took the... Did you say that? Will you answer the question if you said that?
Let's go.
You didn't say that. Okay.
I said libertarians are on the right side of history, and then I said that they've taken and co-opted some positions.
Like peace, right? Like peace.
Statements.
Like peace.
Yes.
Did you mention peace? Who else heard peace here?
Oh my
God. Everyone heard peace.
Okay, Peace. To answer your question. No, FLS, real quick. So, but what I'm saying, which I think FLS agrees with, is that Democrats have used libertarian positions rhetorically in order to be popular, widespread, but when you actually look at their policies, they don't actually implement a libertarian agenda, or at least not as much of a libertarian agenda as actual libertarians.
Then those ideas were never that popular.
He didn't say that.
That's it. It's as simple as that.
Wait, what?
Then those ideas were just never that popular. People didn't give a fuck enough about them to actually see them implemented. Then they must not matter that much.
Since we're talking about war, that's 100%.
I'm sorry. So just let me. I'm giving free.
But we ignored that one. And then Fabian, I also don't think it really makes a whole bunch of sense to talk about like, oh, well, we had a position back in the 70s and now it's being adopted now by the. We saw complete
because they're pro-war.
In the 40s and the 60s, right? Like we saw crazy party shifts between the Republican and the Democratic Party. You can't like you're basically doing what the Republicans do when they say, well, the Democrats are really the ones that were pro-slavery. Like you're supporting pro-slavery.
No, I'm not. You're just taking me out of context, right?
Well,
like for example, I'll give you an example. Right? 1972, when the party was formed in 1971. 1972, the presidential candidate was a black, openly gay man, and the VP was a female Jew, right?
Yeah.
The Democrats and the Republicans wouldn't do that for another 40, 50 years.
Right. No. That's exactly what I'm talking about, and this is exactly why this is such a.
But I'm not
stupid
saying
argument.
one party
This is exactly. Oh, this is exactly why this is such a stupid argument. Because if you look at something, and you look at something back in the 70s, and then you look at all of the social progression that's happened from then till now, then obviously you're going to get an entirely different, like practical party now. This is why you can have like a running mate, Kamala Harris be a running mate now, because we're in an entirely different society and an entirely different world. So if you only look at the party itself, then it almost is like you're ignoring all of the other externalities that could have led to these differences.
Maybe I'm framing it improperly. What I'm trying to say is that maybe we are in some way to blame as voters, right, for constantly taking these compromise votes, right? The same way politicians compromise with their parties and their constituency. And instead, we should be looking at things from a principled position, right? And if you're a Green Party person, you're a Green Party person, right? If those are your principles, those are your principles. But I think what is happening is that a lot of people end up voting Democrat or voting Republican, right? Because they just think, well, at least it's better than the other party. And they're refusing their principles. And instead, they're taking this consequentialist kind of perspective of the ends justify the means. You know, they say that they're for the things I'm for, but we all fucking know that they're not.
That's your analysis of the 1970s. It was the fact that people were compromising, not the fact that people were just way more racist, anti-Semitic, and sexist back then. You're saying that they were actually very progressive and they were compromising back in the 70s.
Hold up. So
what fucking way did I say that? How stupid.
That's the implication of what you just said. You said that
you're trying to draw an implication from a statement from an example. You're being. I don't engage with stupidity. Like just.
You said that it's a result of people compromising.
No, I don't engage with absurd arguments. Just continue and make.
All right.
Wait, hold on. To be clear, wait, hold on, wait. I want to be super clear. Okay. So it sounded like your argument was that the Libertarian Party was advancing like two candidates. What did you say? A black person and a Jewish person? And you were like,
yes.
And you're saying like, wow, this is an amazing thing or whatever. And it sounds like you're blaming the party system or whatever for these candidates not advancing. But I think Pisco's counterargument, like, well, maybe back then people just weren't ready for gay black people to be in these positions. I think that's, considering our history on gay and black people, is that really that controversial of a statement to make?
No, but he's saying that I said things that I didn't say.
No,
so
but you're saying that if people compromise, you're saying the result of us having this slew of candidates that, you know, the Democrats didn't put those people forth, or the reason why the Libertarian Party did not was not able to advance that candidate was because of compromising instead of substantive political disagreement, which I would posit.
This is a non sequitur. Like I feel like a lawyer should just, like, I don't know, go back to undergrad or something, take like a logic 101 class, right? Like these are not.
I'm being illogical.
Okay. No, you are. Like you're trying to straw man, put words in my mouth, and
it was one of the most embarrassing syllogisms I've ever seen constructed on the spot, Pisco. Just.
Let's go to counterpoints.
Yeah, so I had a question actually for Destiny, since he seems to be the person who's like most comfortable with like the two-party system or whatever.
Hell yeah, I love two parties.
That's Fisherman. I got it.
The question, or my question would be like, do you have any particular objection to like? I've heard you say in the past that like caucuses can oftentimes represent the diversity in political thought that the two-party system doesn't. Do you have any problems with kind of like the what do they call that, like ranked choice voting, where
if
like
people want to make a different type of
if people worst of two evils or whatever? I know what ranked choice is. Yeah, if anybody wants to do ranked choice voting, that's fine. Maybe listen, buddy, you're
everybody knows what ranked choice voting is because it's one of the hot button topics. Okay, listen, I'm about to give some more free life advice to every third-party person here. Okay, all the progressives. Okay, there are so many people in this country that walk around and their thoughts are, everybody would vote for my people if they just lived by their principles or knew what we stood for. Okay, at some point. At some point, I know we just went through a whole opioid crisis and we had marijuana shit. At some point, the copium is going to run out, and you've got to realize maybe my positions, my policies just aren't actually as popular with the American people as I wish they were, or maybe I actually, for the most popular policies I have so much overlap with the mainstream parties that nobody would actually look and consider our positions. I think that at some point people have to stop thinking that everybody would vote for me if they just knew what my shit was. Progressives do the same shit in the U.S., and I see third-party people do all the time, and it's like a non-argument. You can't engage with it. Like, okay, yeah, I guess they would all vote if they live by their principles. I don't know how anybody's supposed to argue against that.
I mean, I'm not asking you to prove a negative or anything.
No, but you're hold on. Stop using the debate terms. Jesus. The problem is that like it seems like the feeling that I get, maybe it's just me because I'm not listening well or whatever. The feeling that I get is always this idea that like everybody would vote for us if they were just a little bit smarter, or if they just knew a little bit more, or if they understood us. But at some point, whether it's 30 or 40 or 50,
never said that.
You literally said that. You because people.
Jeg reddede også en fyr. Han var på 1%.
Listen, I think you're having flashbacks to your infrared debate.
No,
Please.
the Libertarian
People
Party
should
just
vote
isn't
for
getting
their-
popular enough because of other people, because other people don't like the specific identity of those
There's
candidates.
so many-
You're blaming it on the voters rather than the campaign staff who probably fucked up, rather than the
or you
policy
can,
people
or let's
who
just
probably
let him
fucked up, or
answer.
every single step in between.
Why do you think these third parties aren't as
the
popular?
fucking government, right? I fucking hate the idea of government, but I have to engage with it, right, as much as possible.
Jeg forstår det ikke. Jeg forstår ikke, hvordan man kan have ideen om en regering. Det er bare mig.
Suggesting, right, that maybe,
bare mig, måske.
right, instead of trying to find maverick
simpelthen
candidates that go against
brain
the
dead
party,
ting.
right, instead
Og
of
jeg
voting
fatter ikke,
down
at der ikke er
ticket
nogen,
being
der
like,
pusher
we
ham
gotta stop
hårdere.
the Republicans, so we're gonna vote Democrat, and I'm gonna try and find a maverick Democrat that'll push the Democratic Party in the position I want, right, and then you just end up voting 90% of the time
Results
for
in Trump.
politicians that you don't
Trump is in
fucking
small
like.
government. Trump is in small government. That just results in Trump. If everyone had listened to you, we would have Trump. If the Democrats listened to you,
That is ridiculous.
How is it
It's the
ridiculous?
opposite. Oh my god. So Obama was small government and that got us Trump. Is that what you're saying? Because Obama was nothing but
people listened to you and didn't vote for Biden because they're waiting for like the libertarian candidate, presumably. Let's say you're talking to a largely Democrat audience right now, or left-wing audience right now. We would have President Donald Trump's second term.
Maybe.
And that's not small government in my mind.
Well, I mean, neither is Biden.
Okay, so
You don't know, like, what's the argument?
So a big government that isn't horrific like Trump, and it's I think better. Or do
Okay,
you?
I mean, you can,
don't see a difference between Biden and
you can
Trump?
have an argument about whether or not Trump or Biden is better, right? I'm simply saying, right, that you.
But don't look at the consequences.
We
Don't
engage with this entirely new
everyone dies, or everyone's worse off, or people. Who cares if people are actually like in
What are you talking about?
horrible conditions?
I know what he's talking about. This has nothing. This is not a new discourse. This isn't a new discussion. This is like literally like the fallout from exactly what you're talking about. Like a lot of times, people end up choosing the lesser of two evils because otherwise,
evil is evil.
Right, well,
It's not the lesser.
No.
Oh my god. Evil is evil. Dude. Lad være med at se Witcher og så tage det literal.
Sure. Evil is evil, but let's not act like we're used to things, right? Like Donald Trump can have an entirely different evil, and so people oftentimes can recognize that, like the harm that this person is doing to the environment, like all of them rolling back regulations and all sorts of nonsense. That these things are worthy of saying, I'd rather a Democrat than to have 4 more years of this guy, because it literally seems like we could probably end up in a civil war if we give him 4 more years, and that might outweigh anything else. So, like, I don't know. It seems nice to just be able to say, I don't care about consequences. I don't care about how anything is implemented. I don't care about like any practicality whatsoever. All I'm saying is that like we should just stop doing this thing. And it's an easy position that you get from your ridiculous and
I'm not saying those things.
You are basically.
I'm not.
You 100% are saying that.
No, what I'm saying is that you should vote, if you're going to vote at all, you should vote for your principles, right? When you vote for the lesser of two evil, right? What you end up doing, you end up with.
You're just repeating yourself, Fabian. But my point is, if voting your principles is if voting your principles, the outcome of that is to get 4 more years of Donald Trump, then at this point your principles don't mean anything. You can repeat all day, I think you should vote your principles. We're saying here's the negative ramification for voting your principles.
The problem is that you're engaging with probability and you don't know what the future outcomes are. So you go away from your own ethical positions, right, in order to vote the lesser of two evils, in the hopes that it's better than the outcome of the other evil, but you voted in evil.
You're
right?
assuming
Technically true, but bruh.
Let's
real quick. Let's just get this out of the way. Hold on. This never needs to be said again, okay? Every single election that you do is the lesser of two evils. There is never going to be a non-quote unquote evil thing because you're never going to have a candidate that 100% represents every single position that you have. So that idea of voting between the lesser, it's still evil. It's still, like, that's going to be every single election ever unless you're literally voting for yourself. So that is a total nonsense argument.
Well, you could vote for yourself.
True.
Yeah, but it's completely pointless if you're not going to win. The perfect is the enemy of the good. The perfect is completely the enemy of the good. There's never Joshua for Congress is not going to be running for president and get every single leftist vote out there tweeting out the craziest shit, or that guy who say we shouldn't have driver's licenses or licenses to put a toast in your own damn toaster is going to be winning anytime soon. Ironically enough, if we're just saying we should just vote for third parties because it matches our principles the most, but it actually doesn't result in our principles being passed, it doesn't result in any sort of co-ops, all it results in our vote not fucking mattering. Ironically enough, by voting for libertarian or green, you are being antithetical to your own principles. You're using strategy. You're actually fucking yourself over.
You're voting for evil, and you admit by saying
it's not voting for evil. People are literally saying, okay, people are literally looking at the platforms between Democrats and Republicans, and they see that the Democratic platform aligns better with their values than what Republicans are. It's not, oh, I think the Democrats are less evil. It's that the Democrats align with my policies better. True. That's what they believe is less evil, which is perfect. They should be voting based on what can get their principles passed the most. So if they believe the Democratic platform does it better, they can vote Democrat. Not fucking vote third party where they get 2 fucking votes. Nobody ever cares. And then Joshua for Congress walks away with 0.7% of the entire fucking vote to a dead guy.
Fabian, also, you're part of the same hypocrisy because by your own admission, you are compromising by engaging in this electoral process because
we have no choice. We have no choice.
Okay, then you're doing the same thing. You're not aligning with your principles because you're not voting for people who call for the end of the American government, and so you're engaging in the same hypocrisy that all of us are doing.
You know what? He is aligning with his values so much better by voting for people who can, at least from a strategic, pragmatic perspective, try and get some degree of his policies pushed than just trying to go full fucking third party and just pray, just hope that maybe if voters aren't as stupid, maybe we somehow get enough money, maybe we just get enough retweets on Twitter, that maybe somehow we'll get enough to win a local city council seat.
Can I please, for the love of God, fucking address this shit?
No, Fabian, at some point, isn't he engaged in the same compromise that we are? He's voting for lesser two evils, which is someone who more aligns with his principles, but they're not saying they're anti-government entirely.
So you can chew on your bone in a second. FLS, please, for the love of God, because I think I can fucking give y'all a bridge to cross, and then you can fucking burn it right in front of my face.
The great mediator.
The fucking centrist cop. Schragen. So I mean, what this really boils down to, because like FLS, we've actually had this conversation in the past where you said like you have like a principled analysis from deontology. You don't want to violate your principles in order to do a lesser of two evils. Utilitarian calculus, and on top of that, because we're a majority of us are making utilitarian calculus to justify our evil shit. That's why evil shit in the world is being perpetuated, okay? And then this can also boil down to like individualism versus collectivism, because like liberal and libertarianism is individualistic, fascism and communism are oftentimes collectivist, okay? And then so my world is being perpetuated, okay? And then this can also boil down to like individualism versus collectivism, because like liberal and libertarianism is individualistic, fascism and communism are oftentimes collectivist, okay? And then so my point being, is that like there is another option, which is communitarianism, or the mix between the two, which is basically like having your principles, trying to violate them as little as possible, but still using the utilitarian calculus as much as you can without like necessarily grossly violating your principles. And the reason why I bring this up is not because like I'm trying to get the utilitarians to stop being utilitarian or trying to get the individualists to stop being individualist, but because it's like for you guys, it kind of seems like if everybody got on the same page and we all start practicing individualism and our principles and all that kind of stuff, the world would be a better place collectively. But because we don't, we fail that. But non-participation is also not bloodless. You can have like your hands clean because you didn't participate in the fucking system or whatever, but your lack of participation also does like foster different fucking outcomes. So that's what I'm saying. It's like you have to have a conversation between these two moral paradigms, or else you end up completely in Pisco's camp where you just want everybody to do heroin, including 2-year-olds, or you end up in FLS's fucking camp and you want everybody to do heroin, including 2-year-olds. So, but for different reasons.
But there's so there's a difference in so what you're the problem is you're creating an either or scenario, right? Like there's dual power theory. There's the idea of like voting local sheriffs in, right? That align with all of your views that are libertarian, like anti-drug war and pro-Second Amendment, right? There's agorism, right? Like refusing to engage with laws in terms of the economy and just circumnavigating shit, like individuals that, let's say, sell raw milk by selling memberships to a community or selling it as pet milk or things like that, right? Like there are other ways of engaging the fight against the state that don't require you to.
You're voting and you're compromising, aren't you? You're voting for someone who doesn't align with you politically perfectly, and in fact, almost I don't know if there's any libertarian candidate who says I want to dissolve the American government. And so, aren't you engaged in the very same hypocrisy that you're accusing us of?
I mean, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so then don't criticize us for that.
No. I mean,
he's not engaging in that. What are you talking about? You can be a hypocrite and still say that something is wrong, right? It doesn't change the argument. I fully and wholly admit, right, that I have voted in my life and that is a moral conundrum that I personally struggle with because I'm not sure whether or not, right? I'm okay with saying that I'll take that L, right?
And you're consequentialist.
It's not just about being an L. It's really hypocritical. And I mean, it's not just about being a hypocrite either. It's almost like it's really short-sighted, right? Because most of the time, I think most of us would admit like that we're not trying to operate out of hypocrisy. The problem is, like, once your hands are tied and you're kind of forced into doing something, then it's like, okay, so now we've done that. We've made this hard choice, right? We had no choice, and so we did whatever we did whatever the frick we had to do. And so like that's the world that we're in.
Jeg skal også videre. Jeg skal også videre. Jeg må se det på et andet tidspunkt. Ham her er kind of stupid. Han er fucking idiot. Han er ANCAP, han er også idiot. Så de andre, de mimer bare. Jeg ved det ikke. Anarkokapitalisme. Ja. Jesus. Det er seriøst. Ja, jeg skal ind og se. Hvad er det? Royal Arena? Hele fucking weekenden. Det er hårdt. Jeg skal ind og se Counter-Strike i Royal Arena. I dag, i morgen og i overmorgen. Ja, det bliver fedt. Jeg håber, det bliver nice. Vi ses på tirsdag. Ses her.